In today's video, we're going to talk about multi-select so that you can essentially select multiple items in your SharePoint list and then output them as either a PDF or a Word document. I'm going to cover how to do both setups so you can pick and choose which one works best for you, but how you would use that. There isn't an out-of-the-box connector for doing that, so we're going to use a yes/no column that we add in here in order to facilitate this automation. And the output from that is essentially, as you can see here, that we've selected two different SharePoint list items, and we got a Word document and a PDF for each one of those selections. Now, I always forget to say this, but don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if this kind of content is what you're looking for. And if you do have requests for something that I haven't covered on this channel, put it in the comments, and I'll see if I can put a video together to explain it. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. There are 3 to 4 essential things we need to have set up in order to get this process for multiple selections to be able to change into either a Word or a PDF document. The first is you have to have your SharePoint list that you want to actually put into a PDF or a Word doc. So this is going to be the SharePoint list that we're going to use here. And then what you're going to need from there are some SharePoint document libraries. Now, the first one is where you're going to store your template. Now, in this case, I've created a template processing document library, and then I created a folder for the request intake in case you have multiple different things that you are going to use your SharePoint portal for. You want to have a way to differentiate which template you're looking at. And in this case, we dropped the project request intake into here. I usually recommend keeping the templates separate from your main document libraries. You can have as many document libraries or SharePoint lists as necessary, so there's no reason not to have your templates stored separately. We don't want to mix the templates with the final out product has been my experience. You always want to keep that information kind of separate. The user only needs to see their files or their outputs, so it's only essential that they have access to that, not the templates. Now, since we're talking about the template, let's go ahead and take a look at the template that we're using in this particular instance. Now, this is the template we're going to use, and as you can see, I've gone and filled it out. It's basically set up for all the different fields inside of our SharePoint list. And it's really easy to put these in. All you have to do is go to your developer mode. Now, if you don't have developer mode, all you have to do is go into the options and you can turn the developer mode menu on so you can see all the different options here. But all you're going to do is set this thing up first, and usually I recommend put all the different fields and put all the different header items in there. And then you want to add the controls. Now, when we look at the control area here, the 2 primaries you're going to be concerned with is the rich text content control and your plain text. You don't need to worry about pretty much anything else here for most of your use cases. Now, you'll see in this one here, the text and the rich text is all really needed for this one. And actually, I didn't even need the rich text. These are all just standard text controls, the plain text control here. All you do is click where you want to put it, and then it will show up there. And then you want to select it, and you want to go to the properties, and you want to put a title in here. Now, I usually put the title the same as the SharePoint field just to make things easy, because what you're going to do is you're going to line these things up, and you're going to say, okay, the project title goes for this control area. That way you compare things correctly and you don't misalign what's supposed to be where. Tag is optional, but I typically put the exact same thing in the tag that I have in the title. But again, that's completely optional. And then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually put in there what this is. So you'll see project sponsor, date submitted. That's optional. You don't have to do that. And if we scroll down here, you'll see I didn't do it for every single one of them. So this is what it would look like if you didn't put that in there. But you could always just type in here and fill that in if you want to. But again, completely optional. I like it because it lines up pretty well. That way, if I have to move things around, I know that everything's still in the right place, but it's completely optional when you set that up. Now, the other thing you want to take a look at is you can turn on your design mode here, and you want to look at spacing. So you're going to want to add that space in there and get all your spacing the way that you want things. You might want to use columns. Really, you have all the options available for Microsoft Word. You can put it into a table. You can make lists. You have a lot of different options on how you set these things up. But I usually do recommend just check your spacing. Maybe you want to put it on the next line. Just kind of make sure everything is looking the way that you want it to. Then you can always turn the design mode off so you can get the look again to see kind of what it's going to look like when it's done. And the final thing you need is where are you going to store it? And in this case, I'm just going to use the standard document library, and then I created a folder for project requests, and all of the exported files will go into this file. Now, if you're wondering about these, this is from the previous video on this topic where I showed you how to select a specific SharePoint item list and then run the automation for that item. And in that particular case, we set it up the exact same way where we're doing a Word document and then we're doing a PDF document. So we're going to mimic that again today, but we're going to set it up so that you can select multiple different items. And again, the process is a little bit different there, but we're going to set it up so you can select multiple different things and you can export a whole bunch of things at one time. All right, let's go back to our SharePoint list. Now, in our SharePoint list, let's go ahead and create the automation. And all we have to do is go up to the integrate button here, and we'll go to Power Automate and create a flow. Now, I typically don't use these out of the box, even though they do work, but a lot of times I want to start from scratch. That way I'm thinking about even the trigger when I'm building these things. So I'll see your flows, and then we'll go ahead and create a new automated flow. Now you're going to see that everything looks a little weird today on my computer, and that's because I'm doing some international travel, so I'm working from my laptop, so the setup's a little bit different on this. I'm used to having multiple screens, so I don't have that option right now. So everything will look a little bit different when we're setting this up than it normally does. Let's go ahead and hit the skip button here and actually just go right into the building of this. Now let's go ahead and look at our SharePoint options here for triggers, and you're going to notice that we don't have one for selected items, which is plural. We've got the option for a selected file, for a selected item, but we need items. And in this case, it's not there. So we're actually going to kind of jerry-rig this a little bit on how we set this up. And for us, we're going to do for selected items still. But let's go back to our SharePoint list because we have to make a small change in order to make this work for us. Now, for our SharePoint list, we're going to add a column. So let's scroll over here to the right here, and let's add a column. And for this one, we'll just do a yes, no, and hit next. And we're going to call this one batch because we're going to do a batch selection, and we're going to leave it as yes, no, and we're going to do our options here. We want our default value to be no. Yes will essentially indicate that we're going to want a PDF for our process to run for this. And this will be the way that we're going to actually do multiple selections. So we're going to hit save on batch. So now we've got an option here where if we go to edit and grid, we can change this to yes or no. And we can do a multi-select that way. And what's our workflow going to look like when we do this is essentially whatever we want to put as a PDF or a Word document, we're going to go ahead and select yes or toggle this to a checkbox. And that'll be our indicator that we want to create a PDF or a Word doc for this. Then what we're going to do is come over here and select anything. It doesn't really matter what we select at this point. Just keep in mind that the only thing that we're going to create a PDF or a document for is going to be the ones that have a yes here. But we need to have a way to trigger this automation. So we have to still select something to do this. You could also do this through a manual. So you go into Power Automate and trigger it. But a lot of times people want to run it from the SharePoint list. So I'm showing you how to do that, but you could also do this exact same process timed or as a manual where you just click a button and trigger it that way. A lot of different options on how you can do this, but I tend to think this is a little bit more user-friendly for how people actually do things. And what we're going to do as part of the automation is we're going to set these back to no as part of the process. So we're going to run this, and then you'll have the option to not run and create these documents again by selecting maybe down here a little bit further. You're going to select something completely different. You don't want to have check marks already there, so we're going to reset these back to no as part of this process. All right, let's go back to our automation again. Now for our trigger, we're still going to go with for a selected item, so let's go ahead and select that, and then it'll be our SharePoint site. So let's go select our SharePoint site here, and then we'll find our SharePoint list, and then let's go ahead and create a new step. And again, that'll be SharePoint. So let's go ahead and type that in. And let's go type for get items. And then we'll find our SharePoint site, our list. And then we'll do show advanced options here. And let's go ahead and do a filter on batch. Now for our value, we want to set it to true. So we'll say 1. Yes, no's are 0 or 1s. So batch is yes, no column. So we'll go ahead and say for true, we want it to be 1. And let's go ahead and add another step here. And now what we want to do is initialize a variable. So we'll search for a variable option here. And it'll be initialize a variable. And this one's going to be a string. And it's going to be for our impact areas. We'll go ahead and say var impact areas. And our impact areas is a multi-select. So multi-selects you have to process a little bit different when you're setting things up. So we'll go ahead and what we're going to essentially do is initialize a variable, and then we're going to set the variable when we get into the apply to each. And then we're going to actually put the impact areas in there in a common delimited list. And then once we add it to the Word doc, it'll look correct on there. All right, let's go ahead and add a new step here, and this will be a control. So we'll do apply to each. So now we're going to actually work on the processing of the items that we selected. So what we do is we want to get the value from the get items. So we'll select value get items list, and then let's go ahead and add an action. Now we have to do a lot of variable processing, so let's do that first here. So we'll do variable, and we need to set the variable. Now, because we're in the apply to each and because we're doing this a little bit different, we have to clear it out each time. So we're going to select our var impact areas, and we're going to add the expression basically to make it blank. So the expression for that is just 2 apostrophes and hit save. And then we can go ahead and rename this. So we're going to say just reset impact area, and that'll work. And let's go ahead and change our apply to each because we have to add another apply to each here, and we don't want it to be confusing. So this will be item processing. Oh, spelled that wrong. All right, so now we've named that. Let's go ahead and add another action here, and that'll be our variable. And we'll do append to a string variable. And we'll select our var impact area. So we're going to essentially build our comment illuminated list. And let's do our dynamic content here. And then we want to select our impact areas. Now you have 3 options here. The first one is essentially the list. We don't want that one. And we don't want the item, we want the actual value. So we're going to select value here. And it's going to put it into an apply to each for us, but it's going to get this wrong. So let's go ahead and change this out. We don't want it to be the current item. We want it to be the impact areas. And then it's where we're going to use this list here. So we're using the right one. And then let's go ahead and rename this. Again, it makes it a little bit easier when you're using dynamic content to make sure you're getting the right thing. So this will be impact areas. Now, we don't want to continue in this apply to each. We want to continue outside of there. So let's go ahead and add another action here. Oh, before that, let's actually just save. So let's change this. And we'll say Sharepoint multi select to document. All right, and let's save that. All right, no errors, so that's always a positive. That's a good start. Now in the greater apply to each for the actual item processing, let's go ahead and add an action. And this one's going to be our word. So we're going to search for word options here, and we're going to populate a word template. So here we've got our populated Microsoft Word template. We'll select that one. And let's go ahead and select our portal. And then we'll select our document library, which we made it easy to find because it's just template processing. And then we'll just select our file from the correct folder. And then it'll load up all the different options. Now for the urgency, all we have to do now is just basically fill in the blanks for each one of this with the dynamic content. So we'll look for our urgency value and add our urgency value. All right, it pretty much filled in everything, but impact area, since we did a little bit more on that, I left that blank and I'll demonstrate how to do that. So again, we're just going to look for our var impact area variable. So it's pretty easy once you've created all the steps previously. And then for requester, I didn't create a field specific to requester, but we're going to use the created by. And for created by, because it's a special column here, we've got the option of doing the name or the email or pretty much any of these options depending on what your use case is. Or you could actually put a combination of these things together into this if you wanted to. So it could be the display name and then maybe put the email address in parentheses or something like that. In this case, we're just going to go with the display name, but those person columns are great because they give you a lot of different information and a lot of different options. So you don't actually have to ask for their email address because it's already there if you're using a SharePoint person column. So that makes it a little bit easier to work with those. And let's go ahead and add another action here. And this will be a SharePoint. So we'll go ahead and select SharePoint. And then we're going to do a create file option. So we'll find our create file option here and select that. And we'll go ahead and select our portal. And for our folder path, we're going to put it in template processing. And then we're going to come down here. And for our file name, we're going to use dynamic content to create this. And the first part of it will be our title. So we'll start there. And then we'll put a hyphen in here and we'll put ID number. And then we'll add the ID number from dynamic content. And then we'll do another hyphen, and then we'll go ahead and put the approval status. Now, I mentioned this in previous videos that depending on what your use case is looking for, you might want to change this up, but let's not completely forget to do the docx. A lot of times I forget to do that, so while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go ahead and add that in there while I talk about this for a second. In this particular use case, what we're going to do is we're going to create it in the template folder, and then we're going to move it into the final folder where we want the user to be able to see it. So when you're doing that, you have the option to overwrite what's already there, or you could cause it to fail, or maybe you want to rename it as part of this process. But if the status is changed, it's not going to overwrite it. So you might want to just have the title followed by the ID number because this is unique. That way it would overwrite anything that's in there. If you're looking to have all of the different times that you've saved this in there, then what you would want to have is some sort of a unique thing. And here, approval status can change. Maybe you just want to have the final version of that particular approval status that was outputted. So it would overwrite any previous versions in there that had the same approval status. Maybe something else changes down there. Another thing you can do is put in a date time. So the date time of the action being done. So when we're actually creating this file, you could put that in there, and that would allow you to keep a running history of every time this thing was created. But you do have a lot of options here on how you set this up. Now for our file content, let's just add our dynamic content for our populated a Word template. So we'll go ahead and select the Microsoft Word document here. And then we can go ahead and add another action. And now what we're going to do is get our file properties. So we're going to, again, use SharePoint for that. So we'll use SharePoint. And then we're going to do get file properties. And all we're going to do is get the file that we just created. We're going to get the properties of that file. So we're going to select our portal again here. And then we're going to find our folder for template processing. And then our ID is going to be from the create file. So we're going to do the item ID here. And then what we're going to do is convert the Word document to a PDF. So let's go ahead and type in Word. This is a Word function. So we'll get all of our Word Online options here. And we have convert Word document to PDF. So we'll select that option here. And then we just select our portal again. And then we find our template processing folder again. And then our file. And it's going to be dynamic content. So we'll go ahead and find our file name with extension option here and select that. Oops, I selected it twice. We only need it once. And then we're done with that. So let's go ahead and add another action here. Let's go ahead and do a SharePoint create file option again. And this is going to be the PDF version. And actually, while we're doing this, let's change this. I forgot to rename some of our steps, so we can keep track of which one is what. So this is going to be our Word document version. And we'll come down here and get create file again. And this is going to be our PDF version. So we'll rename this quick. When we're moving it, it'll be a lot easier to know which one we're moving. So it's create file, and this will be our PDF document. And again, all we're doing is finding our file. So let's go open up our portal again, and it's template processing. And then we'll do the file extension again. Now for the file name, it's easier to just come up here and generate from our create file option here. We'll just copy this because it's all the exact same information. And then we'll come back down here and then we'll go ahead and paste it in. But we do need to change to PDF. And for our file content, let's go ahead and add our dynamic content, and it'll be from our conversion. So let's go ahead and select that. All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. Let's go ahead and move our files now. So again, that'll be a SharePoint option. And let's go find our move files. So we'll just type in move, and we're going to move a file. Now we're moving it from, so we'll select again all the same information here. And while we're doing this, let's go ahead and change the name of this so we can keep, again, everything kind of straight in our head what we're moving. And this will be our Microsoft Word, and then we'll do our PDF next. And which file do we want to move? Let's go ahead and use dynamic content. And this will be from our creating our Word document. So let's create file Word document here. and it'll be our ID. So let's select that. And that should have added it up here. Perfect. All right, so we want to move that file. And then we want to do our destination. Again, it's the same portal, but a different folder. So let's go ahead and move that to our shared document folder. And we want to put it in the project request folder here. And let's go ahead and scroll back down. And we want to determine what happens. Now, I usually go with replace, but you do have these other options. So if you want to fail or if you want to move it with a new name, you've got those options. I'm just going to select a replace option here. And then we're going to add another option for, again, moving our PDF document. So let's go ahead and find a SharePoint option here. And then we'll do move file again. And again, we'll rename this so that we can keep it straight again. And we're going to call this one our PDF document. And then we'll select our current portal here. And then we'll select the file to move. And for this case, we're looking for our PDF. So we'll select the ID here. And then we'll scroll back down so we can finish the rest of this off. And we've got a destination site of the same location. And we're going to put it in our shared document folder. Project requests. And then we'll go back down to the bottom here and select to replace. All right, at this point, let's go ahead and save. And again, we've got no errors, which is always a positive. Now what we have to do is close this out. So what we need to do is, again, find our SharePoint. And let's go ahead and update. So we'll do update item. And what we're going to do now is toggle that batch to no, saying that we're basically done with it. So let's go ahead and find our portal and our SharePoint list. And then we'll add dynamic content for the ID here. And this will be from our get items list. And what we're going to do is look for batch and select that to no. And it's already there, so that's good. So we're basically just going to make it so that it's by default, next person that comes in there, nothing's been selected. So we'll select that as no and hit save. And now we're ready to test, so let's go to our SharePoint portal and give this a test. And then all we need to do is make sure that we've got 2 selected for the test to run. And we got 1 selected, so we come up here to our automate. And we'll look at flows. And we should see our multi-select document option. And now we just hit the run flow. Now let's go ahead and check our SharePoint document library and see if those files are over there. All right, as we can see, we've got 3. This does take a little bit of time, so let me refresh the screen here and we'll wait for that last one to come in. All right, so now we've got all 4 of our documents, and you can see that it took about a minute and a half or so for these to all process. It does take a little bit of time, especially since we're doing essentially 4 documents. In most use cases, you're picking one or the other, not necessarily both. But at least now we've covered in this flow how you would do both. Let's actually look at how these looked. We'll look at the Remote Work Toolkit PDF here. And as we can see, everything's looking pretty good. Now, in previous videos, you can see I didn't have this bolded if you've watched some of the previous videos on how to do this. So I added that step in here, just kind of giving a little bit more of a bold to these title columns here. And then if we come down here, we'll see that we have pretty much everything's working. Now, one adjustment we might want to do is I forgot to add the comma and the space between these. So I forgot to do that when we added that in there. So that would be something we'd probably go back and adjust quick. But otherwise, I think everything's looking pretty good. I removed the header on the second page also, and then I just added some page numbers. Again, just kind of making it look a little bit better. You might do dozens of different tests to get this the exact way that you're looking for. It's not uncommon for me when I'm building an app. I'll do hundreds upon hundreds of different tests as I'm building the applications. And it works the same for automations. I want to make sure that when I'm compiling or building these different documents, everything looks good. All right, let's go ahead and look at that Word document, which should look roughly the same. And this time we'll look at the cloud migration one. And as we can see, everything's looking good. So both of them outputted correctly. This one only had 1 option, so that's why we're not seeing more than just the one. But everything worked great. But how do we make it so that we get that common delineation? Let's go ahead and take a look at that process. So if we scroll up here, what we want to do is look at where we finalize that process. So we're going to go to the apply to each here. And to do this, all we have to do is add a comma and a space. And it's really just that easy to add a comma delimited list in here for this. Let's go ahead and save this. And then we'll do one more test and we'll confirm that it's being overwritten. So let's go back to our SharePoint list. Now on our SharePoint list, let's scroll over here and see if our check marks got reset. And as we can see, they did. So let's go ahead and edit. And we're going to go ahead and check both of these again. And we're going to overwrite and make sure that that actually does work. So let's go ahead and select one of these options here. It doesn't really matter which one. And you could actually select any item. It didn't really matter as long as the yes is in that batch there. And then let's go to our flow and we'll do the multi-select. Now, if you were to use check more than two, you would not see the option over here for it. You have to make sure that only one item is selected. Let's go ahead and run the flow. And then we'll check out our document library and wait about a minute and a half for it to refresh. All right, now let's go ahead and open up our remote work one. And we can see that we now have comma delimited list here. So it's working as expected. Now let's go ahead and close this off. Hopefully you found this helpful. Don't forget, if you like this video or you find this kind of content helpful, to subscribe and turn on notifications to get notified when I complete content on this channel. It really does help the channel grow. Right now, we're not even at 1,000 subscribers, so we're not even getting monetized for this content that's going out there. So if you could, please hit that subscribe button and get notified when new content comes out. That's it for today. Until next time.